Hello, and welcome to Smarter by Midnight, your quiet little corner at the end of the universe. Today, we're going to imagine stepping into a time machine. The gears hum, the lights flicker, and in an instant you're no longer in your world, but decades in the past. You look around and see a man who has no idea who you are. He's young, full of life, maybe on his way to meet a girl who will one day become your grandmother. And here's the chilling twist. If you stop him, if you interfere with that meeting, then your parents are never born. Which means you are never born. But if you're never born, then who just stepped into the time machine? This is the puzzle known as the grandfather paradox. It's one of the oldest, simplest, and yet most disturbing riddles of time travel, because it attacks the very idea of cause and effect. The paradox works like this. Suppose you travel back in time and prevent your grandfather from having children. That act erases you from existence. But if you don't exist, then you couldn't have traveled back in the first place to stop him. Which means he did have children, and you were born, and you did travel back, which means you did stop him. And round the contradiction goes. You don't have to think in terms of grandparents to feel the strangeness of this. Imagine you're standing on a chalk line you've just drawn under your feet. Then you bend down and erase it. The line vanishes. But wait, if the line is gone, what were you standing on in the first place? The ground falls away with the eraser stroke, and logic itself seems to slip into the void. Pop culture has feasted on this paradox. In Back to the Future, Marty McFly accidentally interferes with his parents' first meeting. His very existence starts to flicker like an old photograph, fading away because the conditions for his birth are collapsing. If he can't fix the timeline, he won't survive long enough to worry about paradoxes. He'll simply vanish. It's funny and dramatic in the movie, but it's a real philosophical nightmare. There are other versions of this paradox too. Instead of targeting your grandfather, you might meet your younger self and prevent them from ever growing up to become you. That's the so-called self-annihilation paradox. Or picture yourself smashing the time machine right after you arrive in the past. If you destroy the machine before it's invented, then how did you ever arrive there to destroy it? Each twist pulls the same thread. You've undone the very conditions that made your journey possible. Some thinkers take the grandfather paradox as proof that backward time travel can never happen. The universe, they say, forbids contradictions. Just as you can't divide by zero in math, you can't erase the conditions of your own existence. The laws of nature simply won't allow it. Others, though, have tried to imagine loopholes. One of the most famous is the Novikov self-consistency principle. It says, yes, maybe you can travel back in time, but no matter what you do, your actions will only ever be consistent with history as it already unfolded. You might meet your grandfather, but you won't be able to stop him from meeting your grandmother. Something will always intervene. Maybe the gun jams. Maybe you trip at the last second. Or maybe, without realizing it, you're the one who pushed your grandparents together in the first place. Your presence was already part of the story. In this version of the universe, the past is a locked box. You can visit it, but you can't change it. Others prefer the multiverse solution. In this view, every action splits reality into branches. If you go back and prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother, then one branch is created where you are never born. But the original branch, where you were born and did travel back, still exists alongside it. You've jumped tracks, but the train you came from keeps moving. In this way, time isn't a single line at all, but a tree of possibilities, each split caused by choices and accidents. And then, of course, there's the simplest answer of all. Time travel to the past just isn't possible. Physics allows for time dilation. Astronauts in orbit experience seconds a little differently than people on Earth. But closed trips into the past, loops that let you erase your own beginnings, remain the stuff of fiction. Maybe the grandfather paradox isn't a problem to solve, but a warning label. Don't try this at home, because the math won't let you. The reason the paradox lingers isn't just because it's logical. It's personal. It makes us wonder about our own fragile existence. Every one of us depends on a chain of impossibly specific events. Our parents meeting, their parents meeting, 1,000 generations before that, all lined up in just the right order. Change one piece, and the rest collapses. The paradox exaggerates that truth, reminding us that we are here only because the past is what it is. So whether time travel is forbidden, self-consistent, or endlessly branching into new universes, the grandfather paradox still whispers its lesson. The past is not as flexible as we imagine. It's a web, and pulling one strand could unravel the whole. Or maybe it can't unravel at all. Maybe it's stronger than we think. Either way, the paradox is less about breaking physics and more about humbling us with the fragility and the stubbornness of cause and effect. The grandfather paradox was about erasing yourself from existence. The bootstrap paradox asks a different question. Where do things really come from? Imagine this. You're a struggling inventor, wrestling with the blueprints for a time machine. After years of failure, an older version of you suddenly appears out of nowhere and hands you the completed designs. You follow them exactly, and the machine works. Decades later, when you're old and grey, you travel back in time to give your younger self those same plans. The circle is complete. The machine exists. But who actually invented it? This is the bootstrap paradox, a loop where information, or even objects, exist without ever being created. They're passed back and forth through time, like an endless game of catch where no one remembers who threw the first ball. Think of a famous story. A musician travels back in time and teaches Beethoven one of his own symphonies. Beethoven then publishes it, and the music becomes known across the centuries. Eventually, that same piece inspires the traveler, who goes back and teaches it to Beethoven. So who composed it? Was it Beethoven, the traveler? Or did the music simply exist, floating in a timeless loop with no real origin? This paradox shows up everywhere in fiction. Doctor Who used it often, with characters passing along journals, weapons, or even whole ideas that have no starting point. In one storyline, River Song keeps a diary of her adventures, a diary she only has because she received it from a future version of herself. The book is real, it contains knowledge, but no one can trace where it began. But you don't need sci-fi to see the strangeness. Imagine waking up and finding a book on your desk. You read it, memorize every detail, and later in life, you travel back and give that exact book to your younger self. Where was it printed? Who wrote it? In a bootstrap loop, the answer is no one. The information has become self-existing, caught in a closed circle of time. Philosophically, the bootstrap paradox is terrifying because it undermines the idea of causality. We usually think that everything has a cause. The apple falls because of gravity. The river flows because of rainfall. But in a bootstrap loop, the chain is severed. The effect is its own cause. The invention invents itself. The knowledge teaches itself. Science doesn't rule out such loops entirely. In fact, the math of relativity allows for what are called closed time-like curves, paths through spacetime that double back on themselves. Within those loops, cause and effect might fold so tightly that they become indistinguishable. A person, an object, or even a single word could tumble through eternity without ever being born. Some have tried to argue that bootstrap loops are not paradoxes at all. If the loop is consistent, if the object or information fits smoothly into history, then maybe there's no contradiction. After all, Beethoven's symphony still exists. It just doesn't have a first author. But others say this explanation is unsatisfying because it challenges the very foundation of science, that things can be explained by origins and causes. Think about what it would mean if we discovered evidence of a bootstrap loop in reality. A technology that appears too advanced for its time, with no inventor. A manuscript written centuries before its ideas were known, but with no author. The bootstrap paradox makes us wonder if some of the strangest mysteries in history could be more than accidents. Could they be loops we don't yet understand? And there's something haunting about the idea. A time traveler giving themselves the tools for success is both inspiring and deeply unsettling. It means that sometimes, the universe doesn't need beginnings. Things can simply exist because they do, locked in a circle that never starts and never ends. So while the grandfather paradox threatens to unravel time, The bootstrap paradox does something quieter, but no less disturbing. It shows us that time can tie itself into knots, creating stories, inventions, even entire lives that have no clear beginning. A song with no composer. A machine with no inventor. A mystery with no solution. Take a moment to sit with that idea. A melody that exists without a composer. A book that was never written by anyone, yet somehow is read across centuries. It's almost like staring into a mirror that reflects another mirror, the image stretching back forever with no beginning and no end. Time travel paradoxes aren't just puzzles to solve. They're thought experiments that stretch the edges of our imagination. They make us feel the fragility of cause and effect, and they remind us that some questions don't have clear answers. As you listen, let the bootstrap paradox linger in your thoughts. Imagine an object in your own life, a photograph, a favorite story, a piece of advice, and picture it without an origin, passed in a circle that never begins. Would that make it less real, or somehow more mysterious? Take a breath. Let the mind settle. And when you're ready, we'll step into the next riddle of time, one where fate itself seems sealed. The predestination paradox. Picture this. You've discovered a time machine, and with it, the power to change the past. You set your sights on a single event, a disaster you've always wished you could prevent. Maybe it's a personal tragedy, maybe it's a world-shaking event. You prepare carefully, go back to the very moment it happened, and everything you do to stop it only makes it unfold exactly the way you remember. That's the predestination paradox. It's the trap of fate written into time itself. The idea that your attempt to change the past is not just doomed to fail, but is actually the very reason the past happened the way it did. Think about the old Greek tragedies. In the story of Oedipus, the prophecy says he will kill his father and marry his mother. In horror, his parents try to stop it. They send him away to die, but that very act is what places him in the path of the prophecy. By trying to change fate, they guarantee it. That's a predestination loop in its purest form. The more you resist, the more tightly you're woven into destiny. Time travel stories love this paradox. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry is saved from a deadly attack by what he thinks is another wizard. Later, when he travels back in time, he realizes it was himself all along. His trip into the past didn't change events, it fulfilled them. The circle is closed, and the outcome was never in doubt. Or consider the story of someone trying to stop an invention. Maybe they travel back to burn the papers of a great scientist, believing that if they succeed, the invention will never exist. But in doing so, they inspire the scientist to rewrite the lost work, perhaps even better than before. In their desperation to erase history, they become a character within it. Philosophically, this paradox raises haunting questions about free will. If you go back in time, are you making choices, or are you playing out a script that's already written? If history cannot be changed, then every action you take was already accounted for, every decision folded into the timeline long before you were born. Science hasn't ignored this idea either. The Novikov self-consistency principle, which we brushed against earlier, is built on the same logic. It suggests that if time travel is possible, then paradoxes like the grandfather paradox can't happen. Instead, your actions in the past will always be consistent with the history you already know. If you try to stop the disaster, you'll fail in just the right way to ensure it happens. If you try to save a life, your interference may be the reason it was lost. It's a chilling idea that the universe itself might enforce consistency, bending every event to fit a single, unchangeable history. And yet, the predestination paradox is strangely comforting too. It says that time is stable, not fragile. That no matter what wild journeys or interventions occur, the timeline holds firm. From this perspective, the past is invulnerable, and the future may be less flexible than we imagine. So the paradox leaves us with a puzzle not just about physics, but about meaning. If we are trapped in a loop, fulfilling history instead of rewriting it, what does that say about us? Are we prisoners of fate, or participants in a story that could never have been told any other way? Take a moment to sit with that thought. Imagine your life as a book already written, every page turned, every word fixed. You might flip back to an earlier chapter, hoping to edit a line or erase a scene. But no matter what you try, the story finds its way back to the same ending. The predestination paradox whispers that our choices are less about changing fate and more about playing our parts within it. Maybe you've felt it before. That sense of inevitability when a decision you thought was free turns out to have been nudged by 1,000 hidden causes. A conversation that led you to a job. A chance meeting that led to a lifelong friendship. Looking back, you wonder, could it really have been otherwise? Let your thoughts rest on that for a moment. Breathe slowly. Consider how much of your life feels like choice, and how much feels like destiny. Are you steering the story, or simply discovering the next page? When you're ready, we'll move into another strange loop of time. One where beginnings and endings blur so completely that it's no longer clear which came first. Imagine a world where cause and effect are so tangled that you can't tell which one came first. You wake up one morning and find a mysterious note slipped under your door. It warns you not to take a certain road to work. You listen, avoid the route, and later that day you discover there was a terrible accident there. Years later, when you've built your own time machine, you remember that note. And you decide to send it back to your younger self, slipping it under the door, just as you once found it. The loop is closed. But here's the riddle: who wrote the note? This is the causal loop paradox. A circle where every cause is also an effect, and every effect is also a cause. No beginning, no end, just an endless loop feeding itself. Let's play with some examples to see how strange it gets. Picture a time traveler who goes back to the Renaissance with a copy of Shakespeare's works. He gives them to a young Shakespeare, who publishes them as his own. Generations later, the traveler grows up studying those same plays, becomes obsessed, and eventually takes them back in time, handing them to Shakespeare again. In this loop, the plays exist. They're real, they're celebrated. But who actually wrote them? No human mind seems to have composed them. They're just caught in a circle. Or consider technology. Imagine someone receives detailed blueprints for a machine from their future self. They build it, it works, and years later they go back and hand those blueprints to their younger self. The design exists, the machine works, but no inventor ever truly sat down to create it. The invention invents itself. Now let's stretch it further. Suppose you find an old photograph in your attic. You see yourself in it, standing next to a stranger. But you have no memory of the moment. Years later, you travel back in time, accidentally stumble into that scene, and realize you're recreating the photograph. You pose with the stranger, the shutter clicks, and you return to the future. The photo exists in your attic, but who first captured it? It's always been there, looping between moments, never born, never dying. This paradox appears in films like Tenet, where bullets return to guns and causes seem to run backward, or in Arrival, where knowledge of the future changes the past in ways that were always consistent. Science fiction uses these loops to toy with our sense of time, but the underlying idea comes straight from physics. General relativity allows for what are called closed time-like curves. These are paths in spacetime that bend back on themselves, like a snake eating its tail. If such curves exist, then causal loops might not just be fiction, they could be possible in theory. But what would it mean for our everyday understanding of life? Let's ground it in something personal. Imagine a song you love, one that inspires you so much that you decide to learn music. You practice for years, become a composer, and eventually you travel back and teach that very song to the person who first introduced it to you. The loop closes, and the song has no composer. Yet you've lived an entire life shaped by it. Or try another scenario. A scientist solves a major equation that reshapes physics. Decades later, as an old man with a time machine, he visits his younger self and whispers the solution in his ear. The younger self grows up to solve it, just as history remembers. But did he truly solve it? Or did the knowledge just echo endlessly in a loop? Causal loops force us to confront the possibility that not everything needs an origin. We're used to thinking in chains. This caused that, which caused something else. But in a loop, the chain links into itself, and the idea of a first cause dissolves. It's unsettling, because it clashes with how we build knowledge. Science depends on asking, why, and tracing things back to their beginnings. The causal loop paradox laughs at that and says, there was no beginning. Philosophers sometimes argue that loops like this aren't paradoxes at all. If everything in the loop is self-consistent, then what's the problem? The plays still exist. The invention still works. The photograph still sits in the attic. Nothing contradicts itself. But others find this explanation deeply unsatisfying. It makes reality feel hollow, like an echo chamber where meaning collapses. If nothing has an origin, then do things have any meaning at all? Science hasn't given us a definitive answer. Some interpretations of relativity suggest that closed time-like curves could exist, but others say quantum mechanics would scramble them into nonsense. Still, the thought lingers. If causal loops are possible, then reality might already contain objects, ideas, or even people who exist only because the loop sustains them. So here's the thought experiment I'll leave you with. Imagine your own life as a loop. Somewhere in your story is an event, a decision, or a gift that has no beginning. Maybe it's a lesson your parents taught you, one they learned from their parents, who learned it from theirs. But where did it truly start? At what point in the chain did the wisdom first appear? Or has it always been looping through generations, forever recycled? The causal loop paradox doesn't just challenge time travel. It challenges our need for origin stories. It suggests that sometimes things just are. No beginning. No end. Just a circle, forever complete. When people first imagine using a time machine, one question seems to come up more than any other. What if you went back in time and killed Hitler? It feels like the ultimate test case for time travel, stopping one of the darkest chapters in human history before it began. If we could erase the horrors of World War II, the Holocaust, and the devastation that followed, wouldn't that be the noblest use of time travel? But the moment you entertain this thought, the paradoxes begin to unfold. If you succeed in preventing Hitler's rise, then the war never happens. If the war never happens, then you never had the motivation to go back in the first place. And if you never went back, then history unfolds exactly as it did. The loop snaps shut, and the problem sits unresolved. This is known as the Hitler paradox, a specific version of the grandfather paradox, but magnified to the scale of global history. It's the idea that erasing an atrocity might also erase the very reason you tried to prevent it. Now, let's imagine some scenarios. Suppose you travel back to early 1900s Austria, where a young Adolf Hitler is a struggling artist, sketching buildings and dreaming of architecture. You intervene, maybe by encouraging him down a different path, maybe by sponsoring his art career, so he never turns to politics. You save millions of lives by preventing his rise. But here's the twist. Without the Second World War, the course of technology, politics, and even your own family history changes dramatically. Without the war, perhaps your grandparents never meet. Without the war, maybe the time machine is never built. And suddenly, you've erased the conditions that allowed you to intervene. Or try another version. You succeed in killing Hitler before he takes power. But in the absence of his dictatorship, someone else rises in his place. Perhaps even worse. The war still happens, maybe under different leadership, maybe with an outcome more catastrophic than the one we know. By trying to fix history, you've changed it, but not in the way you hoped. This is often called the replacement paradox. Stop one villain, and history fills the gap with another. Fiction has wrestled with this again and again. In the short story Behold the Man by Michael Moorcock, a time traveler goes back intending to meet Jesus, only to accidentally become the figure himself. Similarly, in stories about killing Hitler, attempts often backfire. Assassinations lead to public sympathy, or alternate leaders create darker worlds. Even Doctor Who tackled the idea, suggesting that Hitler's rise was such a fixed point in time that any attempt to change it would collapse reality itself. But let's bring it down to something closer to home. Imagine trying to go back and erase one mistake in your own life. Perhaps you want to stop a painful breakup, or prevent a failure that shaped you. But without that breakup, Maybe you never meet the partner who truly changes your life. Without that failure, maybe you never learn the lesson that gave you strength. Erasing the past might not erase pain. It might erase meaning. The Hitler paradox, then, isn't just about history. It's about the consequences of meddling with events that shape who we are. When you tug on one thread, the whole fabric shifts, and sometimes what you remove takes something vital with it. There's also the chilling possibility of a self-fulfilling paradox. Imagine going back determined to stop Hitler's rise, only to take actions that accidentally put him on the path to power. Maybe your attempt to silence him makes him a martyr. Maybe your interference strengthens his resolve. In trying to save the world, you become the very reason history unfolds as it did. This is where the paradox deepens. Was the war inevitable? Was Hitler's rise a fixed point in the tapestry of time? Or is it only our attempts to change it that lock it in place? Science doesn't have clear answers, but the logic of paradox suggests two possibilities. Either the universe prevents you from succeeding. Every attempt to stop Hitler backfires in just the right way to preserve history. Or, the universe allows you to succeed, but at the cost of creating a new timeline, branching off into a parallel reality where events unfold differently, while our original timeline remains untouched. But then comes the haunting question. If you stop the war in one timeline, does it matter if the original timeline still exists? Have you saved anyone, or only created a shadow world where a better history plays out, invisible to the one you left behind? That's the power of the Hitler paradox. It isn't just about time travel. It's about morality, inevitability, and the consequences of rewriting history. It forces us to ask whether some events, no matter how horrific, are locked into place, or whether changing them would only create outcomes we cannot predict, or worse, cannot live with. So while the grandfather paradox erases you, and the bootstrap paradox erases origins, the Hitler paradox erases certainty itself. It reminds us that history is not a neat puzzle with a single missing piece, but a tangled web where every thread is bound to another. And if you pull on one too hard, you might unravel far more than you ever intended. Pause for a moment and imagine it. A history without World War II. No concentration camps. No blitz over Europe. No mushroom clouds over Japan. The very thought feels like a relief, a balm for a world that still carries scars. And yet, the paradox whispers, at what cost? It's easy to dream of erasing pain, but history is not a single thread. It's a web, vast and delicate. Touch one strand, and others tremble. Remove a single tragedy, and perhaps you also remove the lessons, the resilience, even the lives that bloomed in its aftermath. Think about your own story. Are there moments you wish you could undo? A heartbreak, a loss, a mistake? Imagine if you could. Would you truly be the same person you are today? Or would erasing that suffering also erase the strength it gave you, the choices it shaped, the paths it forced you onto? The Hitler paradox doesn't just ask whether we can change history. It asks whether we should. It's a reminder that even the darkest chapters leave behind echoes. Echoes that shape not only nations, but us as individuals. Take a deep breath. Let the thought settle. Time travel promises freedom, but paradoxes remind us of responsibility. With that in mind, let's turn to a quieter question, one that shifts the focus from what we might do with time machines, to a mystery that asks why no one seems to be using them at all. If time travel is possible, then here's the question that keeps scientists, philosophers, and dreamers awake at night. Where are all the tourists from the future? Think about it. Imagine the year is 3025. Humanity has mastered time travel. Machines exist that can send people back to any year they choose. You'd expect history to be crowded with visitors. Curious students, thrill-seeking adventurers, maybe even bored families on holiday snapping pictures of the pyramids under construction. The signing of the Declaration of Independence would be swarming with onlookers in futuristic clothes. The fall of Rome might look like Times Square on New Year's Eve, packed with cameras, drones, and laughing travelers. Even our ordinary lives might be interrupted by the occasional tourist from centuries ahead, marveling at how quaint and primitive the 21st century looks. And yet, we see none of it. Not a single verified traveler, not a single undeniable trace. History feels untouched. Our world looks exactly as though time travel never arrives. This is the time tourist problem. If time travel is possible, why isn't our present full of its evidence? Stephen Hawking once poked fun at this idea by throwing a party for time travelers. He set a date and time, chilled the champagne, and waited. Only after the party ended did he send out invitations, on the theory that anyone with access to time travel in the future could still arrive at the right moment. But the room stayed empty. The glasses remained full. No one came. Hawking smiled and shrugged, calling it experimental evidence against time travel. But what if there are explanations that aren't so simple? Let's imagine some possibilities. Perhaps time travel exists, but only into the future, not the past. Our descendants may walk the centuries ahead of them, but never step back to meet us. In that case, the silence is expected. They can look forward but not back, just as we can look at old photographs but never climb into them. Or maybe the past is locked, what some call a protected timeline. In this view, the universe forbids visitors from interfering with earlier events. Time travel may exist in theory, but it's like trying to swim upstream in a river with an infinite current. You can dive in, but you can't move backward. Another possibility is darker. Imagine time travelers do visit the past, but they are experts at blending in. They walk among us unnoticed, carefully avoiding any disturbance. Perhaps every unexplained figure in an old painting, every blurry face in a historic photograph, every mysterious stranger in a famous moment, is a visitor who stayed hidden. If that sounds far-fetched, remember how easily a modern traveler could slip into a century-old crowd with a change of clothes and a quiet smile. Science fiction has toyed with this problem for decades. In Star Trek, there's the Temporal Prime Directive, rules forbidding interference with the past, precisely to avoid dangerous paradoxes. Maybe our future descendants have written similar laws. Maybe there are even time police, guardians who monitor history and erase anyone who breaks the rules. If so, perhaps the tourists came, but they were stopped before we ever noticed. And then there's the wildest possibility of all. Maybe time travelers have visited, and their footprints are everywhere, but we mistake them for ordinary history. Could an invention that appeared ahead of its time have been seeded by a traveler? Could strange myths of gods descending from the sky be ancient descriptions of visitors from the future? It's unsettling, but the silence might not be silence at all. It might be camouflage. On a more personal level, think about your own life. If time tourists existed, wouldn't they be curious about you, right now, listening to this? Wouldn't some descendant want to peek into the life of their ancestor, to see where they came from? If no one ever does, what does that mean? Are you living in a timeline no one returns to, a quiet branch of history with no visitors? Or is the very absence of tourists a clue that time travel never arrives? Not in our future, not in anyone's? The time tourist problem echoes another great puzzle. Fermi's paradox, the question of why we don't see evidence of extraterrestrial civilizations despite the vastness of the universe. Both riddles point to the same haunting silence. If extraordinary possibilities exist, then where is everybody? Maybe the absence of tourists is evidence that time travel is impossible. Maybe the laws of physics close the door before it opens. Or maybe, just maybe, the tourists are here, smiling quietly, taking notes, slipping back to their century, while we go on believing we're alone. Close your eyes for a moment, and imagine standing at a famous moment in history. The moon landing. The first printing of a book. The day the Berlin Wall came down. Now picture the crowd. Faces from that era, and maybe one that doesn't belong. A tourist from 100 years in the future, quietly observing, blending in unnoticed. The time tourist problem lingers, because it makes us question not just the physics of time, but the silence of our own world. If visitors should be here, and yet are not, what does that say about us? Are we the forgotten branch of history? A timeline no one bothers to visit? Or is the silence itself the greatest evidence of all? Proof that the flow of time is one way, forever forward, never back? Let that thought sit with you. Think about your own life. your ordinary days? Would you even recognize a time traveler if you met one? Or would you brush past them on the street, never knowing that you'd just crossed paths with the future? Breathe slowly. Sit with the quiet. And when you're ready, we'll turn to one of the strangest and most unsettling thought experiments of them all. A paradox that touches not just time, but life and death itself. Imagine flipping a coin. Heads, you win. Tails, you lose. You toss it again and again, and sooner or later, the law of probability says you'll hit a string of losses. But what if, from your perspective, you never lost? What if, in your experience, the coin always landed in your favor, no matter how many times you tossed it? This is the strange logic behind what physicists sometimes call the immortality paradox. It's a thought experiment built on the idea of many worlds. The theory that every time a quantum event occurs, the universe splits into branches. In one branch, the coin lands heads. In another, tails. Both outcomes exist side by side, but you only ever experience one. Now imagine raising the stakes. Instead of a coin, it's a machine that tests life and death with every pull. Each time, in one universe you're gone, but in another, you survive. And from your own perspective, you only ever wake up in the branch where you lived. In this eerie way, it seems like you could never experience your own death. From your point of view, you are always the survivor. It's unsettling, but let's ground it with some scenarios. Suppose a physicist sets up a device that runs on quantum uncertainty, maybe the decay of a single particle that has a 50% chance of triggering one outcome or another. In one timeline, the experiment ends in disaster. In another, the physicist is fine. But the physicist only ever remembers the safe branch. To them, it feels like they're immune to the risk, even though infinite other versions of them perish elsewhere. Or picture a soldier on a battlefield. Bullets fly, explosions thunder, and chance decides who survives. In most universes, tragedy unfolds. But in a tiny sliver of them, the soldier makes it through unharmed. In those branches, the soldier may come to believe they're untouchable, protected by fate, when in truth it's just the branching of worlds giving them a continuous lifeline. It even echoes the famous thought experiment of Schrödinger's cat. In the box, the cat is both alive and dead until someone opens it. But from the cat's own perspective, if it has won, perhaps it always finds itself alive, waking up only in the branches where it survived. The paradox asks, could consciousness itself be biased, always selecting for survival? But this raises disturbing questions. If you always survive in some branch, does that mean you live forever, endlessly aging while the universe splits around you? Imagine living into centuries no human was meant to reach, watching worlds collapse and loved ones fade, yet somehow always persisting in one improbable version of reality. Immortality not as a gift, but as a haunting obligation. There are stories of people who felt echoes of this. Soldiers who walk away from battles no one else survives. Survivors of disasters who say they should have died but didn't. From the outside, we call it luck. From the inside, it feels like destiny. But the immortality paradox suggests something stranger. Maybe there is always a version of reality where you make it through, and it's only that version you ever experience. Of course, not everyone agrees. Critics point out that while the math of quantum mechanics allows for many worlds, it doesn't necessarily privilege survival. Just because one version of you lives on doesn't mean you experience only that one. Others say the paradox confuses physics with philosophy. It stretches what's possible into what's terrifying. Still, the thought lingers. If there are infinite universes, then there is always a path where you live to see another day. And from inside your own mind, that path may feel like the only one that ever existed. So the immortality paradox is less about cheating death, and more about questioning what it means to experience reality at all. Do we truly live in a single universe, or are we riding the crest of survival through an endless ocean of branching worlds? And if that's true, then what does it mean to be you? Are you a lucky survivor, or just the one version of yourself who happened to notice? Take a slow breath. Imagine flipping a coin, over and over, and never once seeing it land against you. Imagine standing at the edge of a disaster, a moment when everything should have ended, and somehow, you walk away. In one world, you didn't. But in this world, you did. The immortality paradox asks us to picture ourselves as survivors in an infinite sea of possibilities. It's tempting to find comfort in that, the idea that we might always wake up in the branch where we live. But it's also unsettling. What kind of life would it be, stretched endlessly, one survival after another, as the rest of reality drifts further away? As you sit with that thought, consider your own narrow escapes. The close calls. The near misses. The moments when things could have gone differently. Were they just luck, or echoes of 1,000 other branches you'll never see? Let the question rest quietly. Don't chase an answer. Just breathe, and let the thought ripple through you. When you're ready, we'll continue on to the next paradox of time, where we face not survival, but the possibility of absolute nothingness. When you run into the grandfather paradox, or the Hitler paradox, or any of the riddles we've explored, the contradictions can feel like walls. Time travel seems impossible because logic collapses. But some physicists have offered an escape hatch, a way to slip past paradoxes altogether. It's called the many worlds interpretation. Here's how it works. Every time a decision is made, every time a particle faces a fork in its quantum path, the universe doesn't choose just one outcome. It chooses all of them. Reality splits, branching into parallel worlds. In one, the coin lands heads. In another, tails. In one, you go left. In another, right. Both versions exist, but you only experience one. Now imagine this applied to time travel. You go back in time and kill your grandfather. In one branch, you succeed, and you're never born. But in another branch, he survives, and your existence continues. Instead of creating a contradiction, you've created a split, two timelines, side by side, both consistent, neither erasing the other. This is the many worlds escape. Paradoxes don't trap you, because every possible outcome happens somewhere. Think of it like a tree. Every choice, every quantum event, is a branch. Our lives feel like we're walking along a single trunk, but in truth we're climbing through an infinite forest. When you look back, you see the trunk of history. When you look ahead, you see endless branches splitting off into worlds you'll never visit. Fiction has played with this idea too. In the Marvel films, each attempt to change history doesn't rewrite the past. It simply creates a new timeline. In the TV show Community, a single dice roll spawns 7 different universes, each with its own outcome. And in Rick and Morty, characters casually hop between versions of their lives, leaving abandoned realities behind. But let's bring it home with some hypotheticals. Imagine you have a choice. Take a job in one city, or move to another. In our ordinary lives, you pick one, and the other fades away into what if. But under many worlds, both versions unfold. There is a universe where you took that job, and another where you left. You only ever experience one, but somewhere another, you, is living the opposite decision. Or picture something smaller. You're at a cafe, deciding whether to order coffee or tea. In one world, you sip coffee. In another, you sip tea. In another still, you skip the drink entirely. Each world is real, each outcome plays out. The paradoxes of choice dissolve, because nothing is lost, only divided. Now connect this to time travel. The grandfather paradox isn't a dead end anymore. If you try to erase your own existence, the paradox is avoided. You simply step into a branch where your actions are consistent, leaving your original timeline intact. One you survives, one you doesn't. Both are true. But here's the haunting part. If reality splits endlessly, then somewhere, right now, there is a version of you who didn't make it this far. A version of you who made the opposite choice, who failed the test, who lost the coin flip. And if that's true, then who are you? Are you the real version, or just one of infinite copies, each convinced they're the original? The many worlds escape frees us from paradox, but it traps us in another question. If everything that can happen does happen, then does choice have any meaning at all? Take a slow breath and picture a tree. Every branch, every fork, every split, each one is a life, a choice, a reality. Somewhere, another you is living a life you almost lived. A version of you who said yes instead of no, who stayed instead of leaving, Who failed instead of succeeding, or succeeded where you did not? If all those lives exist, then what does it mean to be you? Are you the true self, or simply one of countless echoes, all convinced they're the only one that matters? It's comforting in a way, the idea that nothing is ever lost, that every possibility is preserved somewhere. But it's unsettling too. If everything happens, then what's the value of a single choice? What's the meaning of walking one path, if all the others unfold regardless? As you let this thought drift through your mind, try to notice the weight of your own decisions. Think back to a fork in your life, a moment when one choice could have taken you somewhere else entirely. In this world, you chose the path that brought you here. In another, you chose differently. Both versions exist, but only one is yours. Hold that thought. Breathe with it. And when you're ready, we'll move into another quantum puzzle. One where even the act of looking backward seems to change what was already decided. There's a famous experiment in physics, simple in setup, mind-bending in its results. Imagine you have a wall with two slits in it, side by side, and you shine light through them. On the screen behind, instead of just two bright patches, you see a series of stripes, like the light is interfering with itself. This is the double-slit experiment, and it reveals that light behaves like a wave, spreading out and overlapping. But here's the strange part. If you set up detectors to watch which slit the light goes through, the interference pattern disappears. The light suddenly behaves like particles, as if being observed changes reality. Look, and it's particles. Don't look, and it's waves. Somehow, observation itself alters the outcome. Now add another twist. In the quantum eraser experiment, physicists found that you could actually erase the which path information after the fact. Imagine the photon passes through the slit and leaves its mark on the screen. Later, you decide whether to keep or erase the information about which slit it went through. Astonishingly, the pattern on the screen changes depending on your later choice. It's as though the past waited to see what you would do in the future. Think about that. Your decision in the present seems to reach back in time and alter the outcome of something that already happened. Cause and effect, flipped inside out. Let's make it more digestible with some scenarios. Picture tossing coins onto a table, but every time you peek at them, they land neatly as heads or tails. If you don't peek, they scatter into waves, blending together. Stranger still, imagine you check the coins only after you've already tossed them, and somehow, your later choice rewrites what they did in the past. Or picture playing cards. You shuffle, deal one face down, and walk away. Later, you choose whether or not to peek at the deck that remains. That choice, after the fact, somehow decides whether the face-down card was red or black all along. It feels impossible, but this is what quantum mechanics does. It defies our instinct for linear time. In the quantum world, the future seems to whisper back to the past, telling it how to behave. Fiction has seized on this too. In movies like Arrival, characters experience time not as a line, but as a loop, with knowledge of the future shaping the past. The quantum eraser experiment is like a scientific version of that, not in alien linguistics, but in photons and detectors. But let's bring it closer. Imagine you're reading a book, and the ending you eventually choose changes how the first chapters were written. Or imagine living your life, and then discovering that a decision you'll make years from now is quietly shaping the present moment you're in right now. That's the unsettling echo of the quantum eraser. The future seems to sculpt the past. Of course, physicists debate the interpretation. Some say the information isn't truly erased, only hidden. Others argue the paradox vanishes if you see the math correctly. But for us, sitting here at midnight, the deeper mystery lingers. Does observation create reality? And if so, what does that mean for time itself? The quantum eraser paradox doesn't just confuse experiments. It confuses existence. It suggests that the universe may not decide what happened until we look, and sometimes, not until long after the moment has passed. So the next time you wonder about your past, the choices you made, the forks in the road, ask yourself, are they fixed, or are they still waiting for you to notice them? Imagine walking into a casino, sitting down at a table, and tossing a pair of dice. You roll them, cover them with a cup, and walk away. Hours later, you return and decide whether to peek under the cup. If you look, you see two neat numbers. If you don't, the dice remain blurred, existing in a haze of all possible outcomes at once. Now here's the kicker. Your decision to peek hours later seems to reach back and decide how the dice landed in the first place. That's the strange reality hinted at by the quantum eraser experiment. Your choice in the present seems to rewrite the past. Let's try another scenario. Imagine sending a letter to yourself, sealed in an envelope. You drop it in the mail, but you can't decide whether to read it until weeks later. The letter arrives, but it's blank until you make the choice to open it. The moment you do, the words appear, as if they had always been there. Somehow, the act of observation pulled the past into alignment with your present. Or picture watching a mystery film. The story unfolds, but the ending hasn't been written yet. Near the finale, you choose which version of the movie to see. And in that instant, the beginning of the film shifts to match the ending you've selected. The past bends, not forward but backward, syncing itself to your decision. Physicists often describe it through photons and detectors, but the everyday versions are just as haunting. It's like playing a card game where your choice to look at the last card changes the order of the whole deck you shuffled earlier. Or like flipping a coin, leaving the room, and later deciding whether to check it, only to discover that your decision in the present dictated how the coin fell in the past. Think about daily life. You walk into a room, see a stranger, and strike up a conversation. Hours later, you decide to call a friend who introduces you to someone new. And somehow, it feels like that later choice echoes backward, as if the stranger you met earlier had been waiting for it all along. Of course, in real life it's coincidence, but the quantum eraser suggests something even more uncanny. Sometimes the universe may actually wait for you to decide before finalizing what already happened. This touches our deepest intuitions about memory and history. We like to think the past is solid, a stone path behind us. But the quantum eraser whispers that maybe the past is more like sand, shifting until our attention hardens it. When we don't look, it's loose and undefined. When we finally turn back, the path solidifies, as though it had always been there. And if that's true, then what does it mean for the story of your life? Are there moments in your past that only became real because you remembered them? Could there be events that remain in limbo, undefined, until you bring them into focus? It's unsettling to think that memory itself might be part of the act of observation, finalizing a past that hadn't been fully decided. Fiction echoes this too. In Donnie Darko, choices ripple backward as much as forward, bending time like glass. In Arrival, knowing the future rewrites the past. Even in thrillers like Inception, the idea that observation shapes reality is central. Dreams shift and collapse the moment they're noticed. But the quantum eraser paradox doesn't just belong to movies. It belongs to your coffee cup, your breath, the light hitting your eyes as you listen now. Every photon around you carries with it a question. Did it take one path or many? And the answer might not exist until you decide to look. So the next time you ask yourself whether the past is fixed, consider this. Maybe it's not just the future that's uncertain. Maybe the past itself is still waiting, quietly unfinished, until you turn your gaze back and decide what story it tells. Close your eyes for a moment and think back to your own past. A birthday party, a walk home at night, a quiet meal with someone you loved. You remember it as though it were fixed, a stone already laid. But what if those moments are not as solid as you think? What if the past is waiting, quietly, to see how you look back on it? The quantum eraser suggests that reality is not carved in stone, but written in pencil. A pencil that erases, rewrites, and sharpens itself based on your attention. It makes you wonder, how many of your memories feel certain only because you decided to observe them, and how many are still shifting quietly in the dark? Take a breath. Let the thought ripple through you. Consider that the line between past and present may be thinner than we imagine, that your gaze itself could be part of the machinery of time. When you're ready, we'll move into another paradox, one that takes a very different approach. Instead of saying the past can change, it insists the opposite, The past can never be changed at all, no matter how hard you try. This is the strange logic of the self-consistency principle. By now, we've seen paradoxes that tear holes in logic. The grandfather paradox, the Hitler paradox, causal loops that spin without origin, and experiments where the future seems to change the past. Each one seems to suggest that time travel is impossible, or at least unstable. But there's another idea, one that flips the problem around. What if the universe itself simply refuses to allow contradictions? What if no matter how hard you try to change the past, every action you take will only ever fulfill it? This is the Novikov self-consistency principle. It's the idea that the timeline is like a locked puzzle. You can move the pieces around, but the picture always stays the same. Imagine stepping into a time machine, determined to stop a disaster. Maybe it's a great fire, or a war, or even a personal tragedy. You arrive in the past with the best intentions. You warn people, you try to stop events, you fight against destiny. And yet, every action you take becomes part of the very history you were trying to prevent. You start the fire by accident. Your warning inspires the war. Your attempt to stop the tragedy is the reason it unfolded in the first place. It's a cruel joke, but also a neat solution. There are no paradoxes, because the universe simply won't allow them. We see echoes of this in stories. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry believes he was saved by another wizard casting a powerful spell. Later, he realizes it was himself all along, traveling back in time. His attempt to change events didn't alter history, it fulfilled it. The loop was consistent from the start. Or think about 12 Monkeys, where Bruce Willis's character is sent back to stop a plague. Every attempt he makes only confirms the timeline he came from. His mission doesn't change history. It's the reason history unfolded the way it did. Now imagine a simpler scenario. Suppose you go back in time determined to stop your grandfather from meeting your grandmother. You bump into him on the street, planning to intervene, but instead you accidentally knock him into her path. The very act of trying to prevent their meeting causes it to happen. The loop closes neatly, consistent and unbreakable. Or picture this. You build a time machine, but in order to use it, you need the final piece of the design. Then one day, a mysterious stranger hands you the missing blueprint. Years later, you realize that stranger was you, traveling back. In another paradox, this might raise questions of origin. But under Novikov, it's not a contradiction at all. It's simply the way history was always meant to unfold. What makes the self-consistency principle so eerie is its sense of inevitability. It says that time is resilient. You can kick it, twist it, try to bend it, but it will always snap back into shape. In some ways, it's comforting. The universe is stable, unbreakable, immune to careless travelers with machines. But in other ways, it's terrifying, because it means you never truly have free will. Your choices are illusions that always funnel into the same outcome. Let's test it with some hypotheticals. Imagine a time traveler who wants to stop the Titanic from sinking. They warn the captain, urging him to change course. But the captain mistakes the warning for sabotage, ignores it, or even speeds up, ensuring the iceberg collision happens exactly on schedule. Or picture going back to stop a famous assassination. You leap into action, try to stop the assassin, but your interference distracts the guards, giving the killer the opening they needed. The tragedy occurs, exactly as the history books recorded. On a smaller scale, you try to stop yourself from missing a bus. You rush to warn your younger self, shouting across the street. Your shout distracts them, causing them to miss the bus, just as you remembered. Every attempt to change the past becomes part of the past. No paradox, no contradiction. Just inevitability. The self-consistency principle has a strange beauty. It suggests that history is a story already written, and time travelers are not editors but characters. Even with foreknowledge, even with technology, they are woven into the same plot, carrying out events they never realized they were fulfilling. But that beauty hides something darker. If the universe enforces consistency, then what does that say about choice? About freedom? Are we free agents in a flexible world, or are we bound actors on a stage, our lines written long before we speak them? The paradox of self-consistency doesn't scream contradiction. It whispers inevitability. It tells us that the past is unshakable, the present is inevitable, and the future is already waiting for us, whether we know it or not. The self-consistency principle isn't just theory. It's a way of saying that no matter what you try to change in the past, the universe already accounts for it. Your actions were always part of the story. Let's play with some examples, starting big, and then shrinking down to the everyday. Imagine you go back in time to stop the invention of the light bulb. You sneak into Thomas Edison's workshop and smash his prototypes. It feels like you've erased a cornerstone of modern life. But in the struggle, Edison is inspired. He pushes harder, works longer, and eventually files his patent anyway, exactly as history recorded. Your interference didn't erase the light bulb. It ensured it was invented. Or think about going back to warn people about the Great Fire of London in 1666. You run through the streets shouting about flames. People panic, and in their chaos they knock over lanterns, spreading sparks faster than they would have otherwise. The fire you tried to prevent is the very one you caused. Now bring it closer. Suppose you travel back 1 week to stop yourself from being late for an important meeting. You rush to your younger self, telling them to leave earlier. But your warning startles them, they drop their keys, and by the time they recover, they're late, just as you remember. Or try something lighter. You want to relive your favorite concert, so you go back and buy tickets. But in the rush of purchasing, you accidentally outbid your younger self and take their seat. When the day comes, they miss the show, only for you, years later, to decide to go back and buy the ticket. The loop is closed. Here's another. You want to stop yourself from tripping on a sidewalk crack that left you with a scar. You travel back, point it out, and warn yourself to be careful. Distracted by your presence, your younger self stumbles harder than before, falling exactly the same way. The scar still happens. It even works in subtle ways. Imagine you try to stop yourself from meeting a friend you regret knowing. You warn your younger self not to talk to them. But the warning sparks curiosity. Why would this stranger tell me that? So your younger self goes over, introduces themselves, and the friendship begins exactly as it did before. The consistency principle isn't just about tragedies or history books. It's about the inevitability built into every little detail. It suggests that the past is like a novel, and when you try to edit the plot, you discover you were just another character in the original draft all along. And the haunting part is that these loops don't feel like forceful corrections. They don't require the universe to snap you back with magic. They unfold naturally, as though every attempt to resist destiny is just another gear turning in the same old machine. So if you built a time machine and tried to rewrite your life, to stop a breakup, to win a lottery ticket, to dodge a mistake, the very act of trying might be the reason it happened. Which makes you wonder, if time is that self-consistent, are we really free? Or are we just passengers on a ride with no off switch, where even rebellion is part of the plan? Think about your own life. How many times have you looked back and thought, if only I could change that moment? A wrong choice, a lost chance, a door you wished you had opened, or one you wished you had kept closed. Now imagine going back, filled with determination to alter it, only to discover that your effort was the very reason it happened that way in the first place. The self-consistency principle asks us to consider that the past is unshakable, not because it's guarded by walls, but because it is already whole. Every attempt to fight it is just another brushstroke in the same painting. Breathe with that for a moment. Let yourself feel the weight of inevitability, and perhaps the strange comfort in it. If the past cannot be changed, then maybe it doesn't need to be. What if the simple act of watching could change the outcome of events? What if reality itself behaves differently depending on whether or not it's being observed? This is the essence of the observer paradox. It grows out of experiments like the double slit and the quantum eraser, where particles seem to behave one way when left alone, and another when we measure them. Observation, somehow, doesn't just reveal reality, it seems to create it. Imagine you're at a baseball game. A batter swings, the ball soars, and it's heading for the foul line. In one universe, It lands inside the line, in another just outside. Now imagine the ball doesn't decide, until the umpire looks. His gaze doesn't just call the play, it finalizes it. The observer becomes part of the event itself. Or picture a detective investigating a crime scene. The details are hazy, possibilities branching in every direction. The moment she writes down her report, the truth snaps into place. Was the window broken from the inside or the outside? In her act of recording, the past solidifies. Before her gaze, it was still in flux. On a smaller scale, think about your memories. Studies show that each time we recall an event, we don't simply replay it, we reconstruct it. And in that reconstruction, details shift. Faces change slightly, words blur, moments rearrange. In remembering, we rewrite. Your observation of the past literally changes it. That's the observer paradox in action within your own mind. Let's stretch it with some time travel scenarios. Suppose you go back to watch your own childhood. You promise yourself you won't interfere. You'll just observe. But the act of being there changes everything. Your younger self notices a stranger watching. A teacher wonders who you are. A neighbor whispers about the mysterious visitor. That attention ripples outward, shifting events you never intended to touch. You didn't alter history through action, but through observation. Or imagine you go back to watch a famous battle. You stay on a hill, careful not to intervene. But a soldier glimpses your shadow, mistakes you for a scout, and shifts position. That tiny adjustment changes the flow of combat. You never fired a shot, never raised a weapon. Yet history bends because you were there to watch it. The observer paradox also shows up in everyday life. Consider the workplace. Employees often behave differently when the boss is watching. Or children in a classroom, sitting straighter when the teacher enters. Even animals shift when they know they're being observed. In some way, this is a mundane version of the quantum effect. Observation changes behavior, which changes outcomes. Fiction loves this too. In The Truman Show, Truman's life is normal only until he realizes he's being observed. In 1984, the ever-present gaze of Big Brother isn't just surveillance. It shapes how people act and even what they believe. The observer doesn't just record reality, it defines it. And here's a haunting hypothetical. Imagine if every historical record we've ever uncovered, every photograph, diary, painting, wasn't just preserving the past, but finalizing it. Perhaps those events remained fluid until we noticed them, and our gaze sealed them forever. In that sense, historians aren't just chronicling events. They're collapsing possibilities into facts. The observer paradox pushes us to ask, what is reality when no one is looking? If a tree falls in the forest with no one to hear it, does it make a sound? Science hints the answer may be stranger. The tree may not even fall in the way we imagine until it is observed. It leaves us with a thought both unsettling and beautiful. Maybe the universe is not a painting, finished and hung, but a sketchbook still waiting for eyes to complete the drawing. Imagine you're driving on an empty road. You check your speedometer, 55 miles an hour. You relax, glance away. Moments later, you glance back, and now it's 65. Did your looking change your driving? Perhaps not. But imagine instead that you always slowed down every time you saw a police car watching. The very act of observation, or even the possibility of being watched, changed your behavior, which changed the outcome of your trip. Now picture being in school. A teacher steps out of the room, and chatter erupts. Paper airplanes fly. But the moment she returns and her gaze sweeps the room, silence falls. The same classroom, the same kids, but observation transforms chaos into order. Even in the natural world, animals change under observation. Birds sing differently when humans are nearby. Wolves alter their hunting patterns when tracked. Observation doesn't just record, it intrudes. But the paradox gets stranger when we shrink down to particles. In the double-slit experiment, light acts like a wave, creating beautiful interference patterns. But the moment we place detectors to watch which slit the photons pass through, the interference disappears. The light behaves like particles instead. Watching collapses the wave. And here's the kicker. Remove the detectors after the photons have already passed, and the interference returns, as if the particles knew whether they'd be observed, even after the fact. In some versions, the choice of whether to observe made after the event still seemed to affect what the particle did before. Cause and effect bend into each other. Now, let's imagine stories that capture this paradox in human terms. Suppose you're a historian obsessed with an old diary. The handwriting is faint, the words unclear. You spend years studying it, interpreting every phrase. At first, the events it describes seem contradictory. But the more you observe, the more the story aligns. It's as if your attention itself clarified what the diary meant. Did the past bend under your gaze? Or did your gaze bend to meet the past? Or imagine a man who builds a time machine just to watch his childhood. He promises not to interfere, only to observe. He sits in the back of a classroom, unseen, while his younger self takes a test. But a child glances back, sees the stranger, and whispers. The teacher notices, scolds the boy, marks him late on the exam. That small ripple changes the child's grade, altering the course of his education. The man returns to the future, and realizes he was the cause of the grades he remembered struggling with. He never changed history actively, he only watched. Yet watching was enough. Or picture an ancient village, thousands of years ago. People live ordinary lives, but one day they see a star watcher, someone with strange clothes, standing quietly, observing the sky. The villagers begin to gather, whispering, curious. Inspired by his presence, they start to track the stars themselves, carving patterns in stone. Centuries later, archaeologists call it the birth of astronomy. But was it? Or was it the observer from the future, quietly standing by, whose gaze created the very field of study they came back to watch? Even myths echo this. In many cultures, gods were described as watchers, beings who observed humans, and whose gaze alone changed the course of events. Whether in Greek tales of Zeus's watchful eye or the biblical idea of an all-seeing god, the power of observation has always been tied to transformation. Think about your own life. Have you ever done something differently simply because you knew someone was watching? Maybe you cleaned your room because a guest was coming. Maybe you studied harder because a parent peeked in. Maybe you smiled at someone just because you caught their eye. Small acts, but ones that only existed because of observation. Now imagine if the universe itself worked the same way. When unobserved, possibilities stay open. But the moment you notice, they collapse into certainty. In that sense, you're not just living reality. You're co-authoring it, sealing events with every glance. Really saying? That reality may not be solid until it is seen. That time itself may not be finished until someone bears witness. And that the line between watching and shaping might not exist at all. It leaves us with an unsettling question. If observation shapes reality, then who, or what, is observing all of us? Take a breath. Imagine the world when no one is looking. Empty streets. A quiet forest. The night sky above a desert. If no one's eyes are there to see it, is it truly the same? Or does reality wait, unfinished, until someone bears witness? Think about your own life. How many moments felt real only because someone else was watching? A performance on stage. A speech you gave. Even a quiet smile exchanged across a room. Would those moments have carried the same weight if no one had been there to see? The observer paradox reminds us that maybe nothing is ever just observed. Maybe the act of noticing is also an act of shaping. Maybe the universe itself is still sketching, and our gaze is the ink that fixes the lines. Sit with that. Let yourself wonder what parts of your own past feel solid, only because you remember them, and which parts may still be fluid, waiting for your attention. Imagine tossing a book into a fire. The pages curl, the ink fades, the words are gone. But physics tells us the story isn't truly destroyed. The ashes, the smoke, the heat rising into the air, all carry fragments of what was once there. If you had perfect knowledge, you could reconstruct it. In our universe, information is supposed to be indestructible. It can change, scatter, transform, but it never vanishes. Now picture throwing that same book into a black hole. From the outside, it disappears forever. Not just the paper and ink, but the story, the memories, the data it held. Black holes evaporate slowly over time, fading until nothing is left. And that's where the paradox begins. If information can never be destroyed, what happened to the story you just tossed in? Did the universe lose it? Or is it still hidden, smeared somewhere we can't see? Think about it with something closer. Imagine tossing your phone into a black hole. All your photos, your texts, your playlists gone. In every other situation, data leaves traces. Delete a file on your laptop, and fragments linger on the hard drive, recoverable with the right tools. But a black hole feels like the universe's permanent delete button. No recovery. No recycle bin. Just silence. Now imagine falling in yourself. Not just your body, but everything you've lived. Your childhood, your choices, every word you've spoken. If black holes erase information, then they erase you not just physically, but historically. Your existence is deleted from the cosmic record, as if you never were. That's what makes the paradox so chilling. It's not about physics anymore. It's about whether reality itself remembers. Fiction has wrestled with this too. In Interstellar, Cooper falls into a black hole and discovers not emptiness, but a strange archive of moments. The story suggests black holes aren't destroyers, but libraries, keeping time in a hidden form. Other stories paint them as prisons, places where even memory is swallowed. Humanity has always feared erasure, because memory is meaning. To lose information is to lose identity. Scientists have argued for decades about how this puzzle could resolve. Some say information never enters the abyss at all, but clings to the surface of the event horizon, like a hologram etched on the skin of the black hole. Others believe it leaks out slowly as the black hole evaporates, encoded in faint radiation like a whisper stretched across the universe. And some accept the darker possibility. That information really does vanish, and the universe itself forgets. If that's true, the laws of physics don't just bend. They break. And now think about your own life. Imagine there were moments of you, birthdays, conversations, a laugh shared with someone you loved, that left no trace at all, not even in the memory of the universe. Would that make them meaningless? Or is the value of a moment not in whether it's preserved, but in the fact that it was lived at all? The information paradox leaves us with a haunting thought. Observation may bring reality into being, but what if reality itself can still forget? What if the cosmos is not an eternal record, but a shifting memory, one where even the grandest stories can fade into silence? Take a breath, and imagine the universe as a library. Every life, every star, every whispered word is a book on its shelves. Now picture walking down one aisle, and finding a gap where a book should be. Not checked out, not misplaced, just gone. A story erased, leaving no memory behind. That's the chill of the information paradox. The idea that even the universe itself may forget. Think about your own life for a moment. The photographs you've taken, the words you've written, the memories you carry. We assume they'll leave some trace, in other people, in records, in the quiet ripples of time. But what if they could vanish entirely? Would that make them less real? Or would it make the act of living them even more precious? Let that thought settle. Breathe slowly. Feel the weight of what it means to be remembered, and the fragility of what it would mean to be forgotten. When you're ready, we'll move into another puzzle of existence. The ontology paradox, where objects and ideas seem to appear out of nowhere, with no true origin at all. Imagine facing yourself. Not a mirror, not a memory, but your future self, standing right in front of you. Older, wiser perhaps, or colder, more dangerous. Now imagine your life becoming a loop, where you are destined to meet, and maybe even destroy, the person you will become. This is the Looper paradox, named after the idea of time travel stories like Looper, where assassins are sent to kill targets who arrive from the future, only to one day face their own future selves. The paradox asks, what happens when the circle of time folds so tightly that you become both the cause and the effect of your own life? Let's play it out. Suppose a criminal organization in the future uses time travel to get rid of evidence. They send targets back in time, and you, the hitman, eliminate them. It works smoothly, until one day your target arrives, and it's you. Not the you of today, but the you of 30 years from now. You hesitate. Do you pull the trigger? If you don't, the loop breaks. But if you do, you're only fulfilling the destiny you've been running from. Or think about it in more personal terms. Imagine you travel into the past to stop a villain. You track them, corner them, confront them. And in the last moment, you realize the villain is your future self, broken by years of choices you haven't yet made. The paradox isn't just about time travel anymore. It's about identity. If you kill them, you erase the person you were becoming. If you spare them, you risk becoming the person you fear. These loops are unsettling because they blur the line between self and other, between past and future. You are the hunter and the hunted, the victim and the villain, locked in a circle that can't be broken without erasing who you are. Fiction thrives on this paradox. In Looper, it's literal, assassins hunting themselves. In The Terminator, John Connor sends his own father back in time, closing a loop where parent and child exist only because of the future they fight to protect. Even in mythology, we find echoes. The serpent Ouroboros, eating its own tail, symbolizing eternity and cycles that feed themselves. But let's bring it closer. Imagine meeting yourself 10 years from now. They look tired, hardened. They warn you not to make certain choices. You promise you won't. But in doing so, you set yourself on the very path that leads to becoming them. The loop is tight, inevitable, and cruel. Or picture meeting your younger self. You want to protect them, guide them, shield them from pain. But your interference makes them mistrustful, rebellious, setting them on the course that leads directly to becoming you. Imagine you're an assassin in the future, sent to eliminate targets who arrive bound and gagged from the past. Job after job, faceless victims. Until one day, you pull back the hood and see yourself. Older, weathered, your own face staring back at you in horror. If you kill them, you fulfill the loop. If you hesitate, you shatter it. Either way, your hands are tied to fate. Now imagine being the older version. You know exactly what's waiting for you. You've lived decades with the knowledge that one day, you'll kneel on the ground and face the younger you. Do you fight it? Do you plead? Or do you accept it, because fighting only drives events toward the same ending? Picture another scene. You invent time travel. You're proud, excited, sure you've made history. But the day after, a figure bursts into your lab and destroys the machine. You fight, furious, and in the struggle their mask slips. It's you older, scarred by what the invention became. In your anger, you rebuild the machine. You grow older, and one day you return to smash it yourself. You weren't just the creator of the machine, you were its destroyer too. Or imagine a dictator rising in the future. Cities burn. Billions suffer. You build a machine to go back and stop them. But when you find the young tyrant, before the cruelty, before the power, it's you. Same eyes. Same voice. A version of you twisted by choices you haven't made yet. Do you end them to save the world? Or by trying to kill them? Do you push yourself into becoming them? It can be smaller too. Suppose you go back to stop your younger self from missing a crucial job interview. You try to help, rushing them out the door, urging them to hurry. But in your interference, you cause them to trip, spill coffee, and miss the bus. Years later, the failed interview leaves them desperate, bitter. That bitterness shapes the very future where you decide to go back and intervene. Or imagine meeting your younger self to give advice. Don't trust this person. Don't make that mistake. But your warnings make them reckless. They rebel. They defy you. And in defying you, they make the exact mistakes you hope to prevent. The loop doesn't break. It hardens. Now stretch it further. Imagine a war breaks out in your lifetime. You vow to go back and stop it. When you do, you accidentally start it. Your attempt to assassinate the instigator only fuels the propaganda that launches the conflict. Decades later, filled with regret, you step into the machine again, to try once more, and once again you spark the very war you've been trying to prevent. Even identity itself becomes fragile in these loops. Imagine raising a child who one day vanishes. Years later, time travel is invented, and you discover the child wasn't stolen by fate, they became you. You raised yourself. The loop has no parent, no beginning, no end. just an endless circle of identity feeding back into itself. The Looper paradox hits us harder than equations or experiments because it isn't about particles. It's about people. It's about the horror of standing face to face with yourself, as a stranger, a target, an enemy. It's about the dread of realizing that every desperate attempt to escape a future only drives you toward it. And that's the gasp moment. The realization that maybe fate isn't written in stars or equations, but in ourselves. That the monster you're running from may one day wear your face. And that the very act of trying to stop it is the act that makes it real. The Looper paradox is the most human of time puzzles, because it's not really about photons or particles. It's about us. About the fear of who we might become, and the haunting idea that trying to avoid that future may be the very act that creates it. Take a breath and let that image linger. You, standing across from yourself, in a loop that has no beginning and no end. Across this journey, we've explored paradoxes that erase the past, others that multiply futures, and some that suggest the universe never forgets. But the Looper paradox brings it home. It isn't about physics equations or cosmic fire. It's about identity, about choice, about whether time makes us prisoners of ourselves. And maybe that's why time travel stories will always haunt us. They don't just ask, what if we could change the past? They ask, what if the past, the present, and the future are all the same story, and we are the ones writing it, again and again in circles? Time is not just clocks ticking or stars aging. It's us looping through memory, choice, and consequence. And the greatest paradox of all might be this. In trying to escape our fate, we sometimes find ourselves running straight into it. Across this journey we've seen paradoxes that erase you, others that erase beginnings, some that trap you in inevitability, and others that suggest the past is still unfinished. Each one reveals the same truth. Time is not the straight arrow we imagine. It bends, it twists, it folds back on itself in ways that defy not just science, but our very sense of self. And maybe that's why time travel stories haunt us so deeply. They aren't just about machines or mathematics. They're about memory, fate, identity, and the fragile chains that connect us to one another. They ask questions we can't answer, and maybe never should. Because sometimes, the mystery is the point. Take a breath, and let it settle. Think of your own life, the choices, the loops, the echoes. Perhaps your future self is already waiting. Perhaps you've already met them, in dreams, in memory, in the strange déjà vu of walking a path that feels too familiar. Maybe, in some sense, we are all loopers, circling endlessly through time's strange mirror. And with that, our journey through the paradoxes of time comes to a close. If you've stayed with me through these riddles and reflections, thank you. We work hard to bring these stories to life, not just as science, but as mysteries you can feel, questions you can carry with you into the quiet hours of the night. If you'd like to keep exploring with us, through more ideas, more paradoxes, more journeys into the unknown, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us continue, and it means you'll always have a place to return when curiosity keeps you awake. Until next time, rest easy, dream deep, and remember, time is stranger than we think, and perhaps closer than we imagine.